Most people go through life reacting to the world around them like a thermometer. But the most successful people learn to be a thermostat and set their own temperature for success. Today, we are learning from the legendary Denis Waitley on how your mind stores the things you imagine as facts. He shares how Olympians and astronauts practice success in their minds before they ever step onto the field or into a rocket. You will discover how to stop focusing on your fears and start programming your brain for the life you actually want. A special thanks to the Waitley family for partnering with us to release this video exclusively here on my YouTube channel. To learn more about Denis Waitley Global, check the first link in the description below.
Well, when I was a little boy, I was in a dysfunctional family. My father was an alcoholic, and my mother and father argued all the time about money. I put my pillow over my head and sort of cried myself to sleep, and then my dad left when I was 9, and I became the man of the family. And my mother said, if you're not careful, you're going to grow up to be just like him. And I always wondered if I could be different from my father, so I tried to find coaches or teachers or people who would give me the encouragement that I could be better than where I came from. And it was really my grandmother when I went over to mow her lawn every Saturday. I could hardly wait to ride my bike 20 miles one way because I knew when I got there that she would say, "Good job, good boy, here's some lunch for you, you're a good boy." And that made me feel so good that somebody approved of me or thought that I could do a good job. And I think the turning point was when we planted a victory garden during World War II. We put the seeds in the soil and we looked on the package to see what was the outcome. And she said, if you plant great seeds, you get the harvest of what you plant because the weeds come in uninvited. I said, wow. You mean whatever you put in the soil comes up? And she said, yeah, if you water it and take care of it. She said, model your life after people who've been really great in their service to others. And you can't help but win in life. You're a good boy. And I think what happened to me is that I tried to get out of my environment into the world and model myself after good role models and mentors and coaches. Well, the secret to me, in my own words, really is you become that to which you're most exposed. In other words, what you read, what you watch, who you listen to, who you hang around with, what you internalize tends to materialize outwardly in your life. I believe that imagination plus internalization equals realization. And as I've been working with astronauts or Olympians or prisoners of war, I've always found that you live inside. It's as if the software is always driving the hardware. And the software program that you've developed is the thing that drives the machine. And that's why it's so important to internalize value, because you project always on the outside how you feel on the inside. It's not possible to concentrate on the reverse of an idea. In other words, you can't say, I'm not this and I'm not that, and I don't like this and I don't like that. All that does is reinforce where you're coming from. So I think that the real secret is you become what you're thinking about most of the time. And whatever your thoughts are, the currently dominant thoughts become ingrained and habitual, like a submarine running silent and deep. I think the junk food in your mind is very important, whether it's the heavy metal rap or whether it's the escape reality television. You become tension relieving instead of goal achieving. And you tend to try to escape from the goals you never set and from the values you never developed. And you tend to find superficial immediate gratification in an outward life rather than the inner life. Imagination plus internalization, or if you will, simulation plus internalization equals realization. Whatever you're imagining, the mind is unable to distinguish between something vividly imagined and that which has really happened. So we store as fact the things we imagine, the things we're afraid of. Is fear real? Of course it's real to the person experiencing it. And when you tell a child there's nothing to be afraid of, well, not to the child, because the child is afraid of a premonition. That's something that could happen. So we tend to use memory and imagination the same way. Memory looks back, imagination looks forward. Many people have bad memories and premonitions. The people who are really successful take the memories that are good and reinforce those, learn from their mistakes, and then imagine a future which becomes the target. And the mind is target-seeking by design. It always moves toward the currently dominant thought, unable to come away from what it's thinking about. In other words, you really have to be careful what you put in the mind, because that is what the program then runs. Internalization is simply practice, and practice makes permanent. Only perfect practice makes perfect. So you learn the correct swing in golf, you practice on the driving range, but be careful. You might practice your mistakes. You need to practice the right way to live rather than reinforce the wrong way to live. So internalization takes place over a long period of time by etching in your subconscious over and over again a neural pathway that is created, and it's almost physical in nature. And I learned that from the Olympians. They rehearse, they go out on the field, then they practice. And they practice the right way over and over again. When they make a mistake, they correct the mistake. When they do something well, they reinforce that. And as they practice the right way to win, when they go to perform, they just remember. They don't try anymore because it's already an impression in the software. Well, my passion is to plant shade trees under which I know I'll never sit. I want to plant shade trees for future generations. I want to be part of the future. I don't want to be part of the past. I don't want to collect life. I want to celebrate it. I don't want to show people where I've been. I want to be where it's going. It's very much like the star thrower, and so many people have told that story, but the true star thrower was written by Loren Eiseley, and it's a series of essays where the old man goes to the beach, and the tourists are boiling the sand dollars and starfish that they picked up on the beach so they can take them home and put them on their coffee table. And most people live life with their photos and their collections to show people that they were there. But the star throwers, the old man and the old woman who take a gunny sack and keep it wet and put the starfish in it and go up to the reef, and they sail it out on the outgoing tide for another year, another week, another month of life. Being part of life is much better than being part of history. Unless we learn from history, we tend to repeat it, and what we need to do is learn from people who've lived before. I feel that if you read and listen to The Secret, as it was passed on from the beginning of recorded time, you don't have to make all the trial and error mistakes yourself. You actually can learn from other people who've been through much more than you have. And why do we have to make every mistake? I've always wondered why young people don't like to listen to older people. They say, I want to do it myself. And you say, you mean you want to waste another 10 years looking for the secret? Well, I think we look at the failure as fertilizer. So if failure is the fertilizer of success, in other words, if you mulch it and then throw it on the soil and it grows a green crop, that's the way to view failure, as a learning experience or a temporary inconvenience, a target correction necessary. So we learn from the mistakes of the past so we don't repeat them. Because who wants to wallow in their own fertilizer? You want to spread it out. And so the past is a way we collect memories. The good ones should be the ones that are reinforced. And we should learn from our mistakes in the past so we don't have to repeat them. And that way we can project into the future the desired result. So that's why I've always said that winners dwell on the reward of success. Losers dwell on the penalty of failure. Winners dwell on the desired result. Losers look through the rearview mirror and see the past coming back to haunt them, that it's going to happen like this again. The marriage won't work out this time either. Oh, you've seen one, you've seen them all. And they always get what they expect in life more than what they want, because the expectation is so powerful psychologically. You know, that's what I've been a psychosomatic psychologist. I happen to believe that the mind-body connection is so intricate and exquisite that whatever you harbor in the mind is manifested in some way in the body. You know, ulcers are not what you ate, it's what's eating you. And many people who are very rigid tend to get a more rigid structure in life. A broken heart can be carrying forward too many hurts, and there's a direct relationship between your health and the way you think about it. You know, what I would do for my health is get the finest medical care in the world, but superimpose on top of it an attitude of wellness and health and looking forward to being well rather than trying to overcome an illness. You know, if you look at the word or the statement POW, is that prisoner of war? Is it Prince of Wales? Is it power of women? Is it POW? Or could it be psychology of winning? Could it be that the representation of something, it depends on the way you think about it? And let me explain. I worked with prisoners of war from Vietnam. In fact, I was the rehabilitation coordinator for some of them. Now, they've been 5 years in solitary confinement. So what do you do for 5 years with nothing to do but think? Do you worry? Do you complain? What do you do? What they did to stay healthy was remember everything good about the life that they missed. They projected being back home. They picked up pieces of literature and memorized them. And one Air Force colonel played 1 round of great golf every day for 5.5 years. 1 round, the best that he'd ever played before in his mind. If the mind can't distinguish between simulation and reality, then it stores as fact what you're playing. And he came back atrophied and withered and shot the most marvelous round of golf, not having played for 5.5 years. And the news media said, "Congratulations, beginner's re-entry luck." He said, "Luck, are you kidding? I never 3-putted a green in 5.5 years." And they said, "Did you have a golf course at the Hanoi Hilton?" He said, "We all have one. In your imagination, you never miss." If you look at that, if you look at imagination as a tool, and you call it simulation, then simulation is what the astronauts do. They tell the astronaut, "We're going to shoot you 250,000 miles up and back by something built by the government. Neil, we're going to put you on a rocket, send you to the moon. We were going to use a chimpanzee, but because of animal rights, we're going to send you instead." And he says, "Will you get me home?" And they say, "Gee, it worked on paper. Gee, it worked in the simulator. Gee, it worked during all of our rehearsals for the last 2 or 3 years. If you do it right in drill, you'll do it right in life." And one of the most amazing things is that discipline is not doing without. Discipline is doing within when you're without. Why would you attempt to go someplace dangerous where you might lose your life? You would if you were well-trained and if you believed that the expectation of success was caused by the simulation inside. Then you take an Olympian. An Olympian learns from a coach. The coach teaches the Olympian everything he or she knows. The Olympian trains for 1,200 days for 1 moment of glory or agony. What would the Olympian do? The Olympian best training is in his or her mind. When you go through a relaxation program with Olympic athletes, they can lower their heart rate by thinking. They can dilate the arteries in their stomach. They can warm their fingers. They can cool their foreheads. They can do this through practice because they've learned to internalize the feelings, the emotions of what the outcome that they want in advance. My heart rate is slow and regular. 50 beats a minute, thank you. Thump, thump, thump. Then the archer pulls the bow back and then releases the arrow between heartbeats. Why? Because if you release it between heartbeats, it doesn't jiggle off the target with a little beat of a heart. At the world-class level, it's mind over muscle, mind over money, and the mind that matters. And that's why it's so important to go inward rather than external in life. Why do we do what we do when we know what we know? Because we don't do what we know, we do what we've learned. And what we've learned, we learn quite by accident. We learn by television, observing, reading, watching. We imitate, we internalize, and so we know better than to smoke. We know better than to drink too much. We know better than to be violent, but we're violent anyway because violence is learned. And so are their habits learned. And they're learned by observation, imitation, and repetition. And everything we'll ever be is what we observe, what we imitate, then becomes internal, and then is projected on the outside. When you look at an astronaut is someone who is very interested in exploring places that no one's ever gone before. The problem with an astronaut is that since no one's ever gone before, it's very, very dangerous and very risky because you can only do it initially on paper or in your mind. So what we needed to do was make going to the moon as realistic as possible in training. So you go out to the desert and you put them in a lunar excursion module and you fly up and down off the desert. And it's very arid and it's rocky and sandy. It looks just like the moon would. And you do that over and over again and you begin to get the feeling, oh, this is what it's going to be like when we really go there. And then you put them in the water so they can get the feeling of weightlessness. And we take them up into a big cargo plane that has no seats in it. And we pull negative G's, which means we go up and pull it so they're floating around. And they're floating inside this plane and they do somersaults and they can do things. And you say that is what weightlessness is. So if you can make training and schooling and learning as much like as real life as it's going to be in real life, we all become astronauts then. I think courage has nothing to do with saying, I'm just courageous. Why? I don't know. I just have this instinct. Courage is learned, and it's learned by being well prepared. Does a person who diffuses a bomb really enjoy that? No. They're very well trained. Are they afraid when they go to defuse a bomb? Let's see. You cut either the green wire or the red wire, or is it the yellow wire? And what if it's been put together the reverse? But a bomb diffuser is so well trained that while frightened is courageous enough because the training has been so good that they have confidence in the outcome. That's why I'd rather say no train, no gain, rather than no pain, no gain. So each of us is an astronaut. We're going places that we think are dangerous because no one's been where we're going before, and this is all new. And that's why it's important to think of yourself as an astronaut who's going to go and come back successfully. I think that the reason that successful people look spontaneous, they're not spontaneous. They learned it. Spontaneity is reflexive action. They look so natural. They're so naturally successful. Look how beautiful she dances. Look at the ballet. Look at that figure skater. Look at that Olympian effortlessly winning. Are you kidding? They went through that training for so long that when they go to do it, they just allowed themselves muscle memory. Then we took the skiers and put a camera on the front of the skis and then took a visual video of the way the giant slalom was going to look. And then the skier, and you watch it in the Olympics, they close their eyes and they're standing at the very top and they haven't even begun the run, but they're going like this. And they're actually going through the slalom run without hitting a flag, without missing a gate. And they're doing it in advance in simulation. That's what we were doing with the Apollo program, but it's almost all mental then. Because the beauty of mental rehearsal or visualization is you don't fail then. You don't fall on the ice. You don't hit a hurdle. You don't have to experience failure in your mind. You can use your mind for advanced success. In other words, pre-play, instant pre-play. And then you replay when you succeed. Then you pre-play success and you replay. But you don't always succeed in real life. But you don't want to replay your failure because that just reinforces it. So winners are able to pre-play through training mentally. They do it, sure they do it on the ice and they do it on the hill and they do it in an astronaut capsule. But the best rehearsal of all is that in the mind. And you can do that in a backyard, in a park, by the ocean, in your bed, in a living room chair. Because the mind has the ability to project yourself where you want to go or where you've been. Yeah, my colleagues and I, we use acronyms. I mean, we all use them. I think every speaker does. Luck is laboring under correct knowledge, and fear is false evidence appearing real. And the word tip means to ensure performance. So you really want to tip someone before they perform rather than just after. Because if you tip them before, it tells them what you would like them to do, and then they try to rise to the expectation. Some of the specifics that I've learned is that you really need to be specific. The mind doesn't work vaguely. It doesn't know what you mean by being happy or peaceful or doing better than last year. It deals with numbers and margins and deadlines because when you consider a publisher, A publisher doesn't want you to just write a book. They want you to know how many chapters. They want you to tell them when you can do 10 pages. They want to know what the headlines are. They want to know specifics. And I found that the more specific you are about where you want to go, the easier it is for your mind to take you there. Would you go on a vacation and say, we're just going to drive till we run out of gas? Would you say, I don't care where we go, let's just go and have some fun? No, you get travel posters and you get the information, you get all excited about it, and you begin to get this image in your mind of where you're going, and it drives you to get there. Once you get in your mind specifically where you want to go, it becomes virtually automatic because the mind says, now I understand what you want. Before you were just vaguely describing something I couldn't get a hold of. And so we really tell people that, of course, writing down where you want to go, but also to have some really short-term targets so they can pull you stair-stepping through. We do that with Olympians. We set low goal, short-term, usually about 90 days. Why? Because you can wrap your mind around 3 months, like a quarterly report for a company. 90 days is a good period of time because you don't have interruptions in the month, so you get a 90-day low goal short term. You begin to write down what you want, where you're going to go, and you can do many of these. They don't have to be just a few. And then you begin to dwell on where you want to be in that 90-day period. The interesting thing about a deadline, especially for material goals, is that people procrastinate. And they only get going when there's a due date. And that's why college students stay up all night doing their term paper, or they stay up all night cramming for the exam. It wasn't important to them until there was a due date. So whenever you have something material that you want, put a due date on it because it will force you to take action. For a goal that is not material, to be a good father, to be more intimate, to be more caring, never put a due date on a character goal. I'd like to be a good father 2.5 years from now. Yeah, right. I am a good father now. I am caring with my loved ones. I listen rather than preach. I am this kind of person. And as you internalize the person that you want to be, I do that with myself. I used to be Waitley come lately. I used to arrive late because my name was Waitley, so make them wait. But now I'm swiftly or rushly, and I'm first to the gate Waitley. So I've decided to be first at the gate and not make people wait. And so as I put that in my mind, was I a person who was late? Yeah, up until that time. Did I immediately become an on-time person? No. But as I began to think about the person that I wanted to be, I became on time. Be specific with material goals. Be, if you will, in the present tense with the things you really want to occur, because the mind stores as reality in long-term memory things that you give importance to in the present tense. That's why through the years all of the speakers and motivators have used the affirmative present tense, personal, optimistic. I am becoming. My breathing is relaxed and effortless for an Olympian. My heart rate is slow and regular. Because only by putting that in the present will the mind say, oh, I see, we want it now. You want that to occur now. So you put an affirmative present tense to the kind of person you want to be, and the mind helps you get there sooner. It's better also to be practicing and rehearsing when you're very relaxed. The more relaxed you are, the more possible it is for both hemispheres of the brain. When the left hemisphere is quieted, the right hemisphere not only can see and feel the emotions, but also can hear the words that come through, because when it's relaxed, it no longer guards you against incoming stimuli. You relax, you're focused, you're very focused, and now you listen to soft music. Why? Music is emotional and inspires next to eating. Maybe it's eating, sex. No, it's eating, music, and sex. But music has the ability to speed or lower the heart rate and the way you think to the beat of the music. And that's why the slow classical music at 1 beat per second, you'll find an Olympian sitting quietly with the heart rate slow, the endorphins flowing, the mind totally open and receptive, that's when they do their rehearsal. So a good idea is not to sit in the locker room and go, ugh, we're going to beat them, ugh, champions, ugh. That's the old style, to get fired up. You don't want to get fired up. You want to get relaxed. You want to get focused. You want to be receptive. And you want to go over the script. And you want to project inside and manifest what you want to happen on the outside. Because if you get all fired up, you go out and make mistakes. You push and press and try and worry. Your heart's beating too fast. The adrenaline's pumping. You don't want the adrenaline to pump. You want receptiveness. That's why we take athletes or executives and we slow them down and relax them with very, very soft music. I tell young people, don't do your homework with heavy metal or rock music or even rap music. It'll block out the ability for that information to come in and stick, because the softer and quieter you are, the more inspired and relaxed you become, and the more you learn. And then if you're going to put in your statements about yourself, let's say that you want to weigh a certain amount. For a woman, it might be, I weigh 120 pounds and look great in a bathing suit. I weigh 120. I eat lean source protein. I eat fiber-based carbohydrates. Water is my favorite fitness drink. I like who I see in the mirror. When I walk by a store window, I like who I glance at. My muscles are lean and firm. And this is the kind of short statement that you want to internalize all the time. Think about an Olympian. Olympian makes it even shorter. Speed, power, explode, extend, rotate, plant the feet, follow through, touch first. That's it. That's more like it. Need a 10, got a 10. This is your moment in history. Thanks for all the carpools, Mom. This vault's for you. In other words, you're really going through the performance you want to occur, but at the same time, you're trying to relax yourself. So that's why it's important to say and think relaxing thoughts as well as desired outcome thoughts. I can usually tell a winner or a loser, although you can't really quantify people as that. I mean, there aren't winners and losers. There's degrees of winning and losing. And people in underdeveloped countries and people who are engaged in poverty can't be called losers. They've never been given the opportunity that we have in a knowledge-based world, for education especially. But there is something that really distinguishes people who are successful from those who are not successful, and that is the way they speak about and the way they project their own lives. I listen to it in homes, making mountains out of molehills, the way parents handle the regular things that happen in life, people who get upset easily over trifles, people who are always complaining. They don't understand that this computer of theirs, the most marvelous biocomputer ever created, stores and projects everything they think and they say. That's why I always interview people and I listen to what they're saying. Tell me about your life. How's your health? How's everything at home? How's your economy? Are you saving money for the future? What do you think about the future? And if they explain that because of this, and if they blame the government, if they blame their parents, and if they blame other people, if they're always looking to the outside for the reasons why they're not successful, they, in my mind, have become thermometers. A thermometer, if you will, reads the temperature outside. And a thermometer always reads what's happening on the outside. But a thermostat. A thermostat is a mechanism that you set, and it warms you up or cools you off depending on the setting. And the mind is almost automatic in nature. What you get is what you set. What you see is who you'll be. What you talk about becomes a commentary. Then it becomes a script. And then the actors act out the script. I've actually done this before at Lee Strasberg's School of Acting. If you take actors and actresses and you put blood catheters in and you take instrumentation, if the actor or actress is even acting out a negative or depressing part, the endorphin level, the natural high, is decreased completely, and you get the harbingers of danger or fear in the blood as a result of the part you're playing. It doesn't even matter whether you believe it. It just matters that you're saying it and acting upon it. And that's why be careful what you say to your children. Be careful when you tell them, don't get hurt, don't get sick, do good on the exam, whatever you do, don't press, don't worry. You need to tell people what you want them to do. You need to tell yourself what you expect you're going to do. But unless there's imminent physical danger, do not tell yourself what you don't want, because the mind cannot concentrate on the reverse of an idea. You can't say, clean up your room, you pigs, because the children will go. You cannot say to a high wire walker, be careful, windy day, no net, don't fall. No, you must tell a high wire walker, there's the ledge. There's where you're going, 1 foot after the other, you'll get there. But if you look down and worry about the penalty of failure, you'll never get the reward of success. You'll never reach your physical limits in what you can do in life because of your psychological limitations. In other words, in 1,000 lifetimes, we couldn't accomplish all we're capable of because we've got so much potential. We could memorize the entire Bible in a couple of weeks. We could know 7 or 8 languages easily. The things that we can do with this magnificent computer that God has given us, that we've been endowed with. We've been sprinkled at our conception. We've been given more talents, which are inborn. Talents are inborn, and behavior and performance is learned. Well, we've got more talent than we could ever use. The problem is we never outgrow the limitations we set. We only set new ones within which we must live. So we've given ourselves a limitation on earnings. And we say, that's all I'm capable of earning. Why? Because no one in the family ever earned any more. And with my education and my background, I can't earn any more. And yet there have been thousands of people who've earned more in 1 year than all of their previous 50 years previously, simply because all their experience went together. They found a secret. They manifested something inside. The things they loved to do most, their passion, became part, instead of a hobby, became part of their career. Instead of an avocation, it became their vocation. So I really look at limitations as being the biggest things. They're psychological. And that's like planting a big tree in a flower pot. You get root bound by your psychological and environmental limitations when there's virtually no limits on the physical ability to do things. We rarely reach our physical limits in life. Sure, I'm old enough to know that I can't run at a certain speed. I'm old enough to know that maybe I won't be an astronaut unless they want to take some seniors up, and then I'll pay to go. There are some things that physically my limits have already been reached. But there are so many things that I can do that I haven't tried to do because I've been afraid because of this thermometer versus the thermostat. I really am a thermostat now. I see where I want it, what the temperature I want, and I raise it there. And then what happens to me is I keep trying to perform up to the setting that I've set. Whereas the other people who are thermometers just lay there and let what's happening in the world indicate what their temperature should be. Well, if that were true, then we'd only be the temperature of the economy and the temperature of all the problems in the world. But you really have to look at limitations being here and limits being things that we'll rarely ever test.
And congratulations, you're 1 video closer to who you're meant to be. Believe. To get more advice from the legendary Earl Nightingale, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I'd like to tell you about the strangest secret in the world. Not long ago, Albert Schweitzer, the great doctor and Nobel Prize winner, was being interviewed in London, and a reporter asked him, "Doctor, what's wrong with men today?"